All right, now I can officially say hello. Good afternoon, everyone. Today I'm going to be doing part 3 of the series that we began about a month ago called America in Decline, the Fall of a Nation. It's really interesting when you look at the conditions around America today, the rise and the escalation, the civil unrest. It's really, I was just told just before I come up, Audrey heard on the way over here that the protest that's going on at some of these events in the political realm, that it actually transcends the political realm. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. I'm talking about some of the messages. It's really important, and I really believe, and I don't know how to tell you how important I feel driven inside for this series. And as you see today, how important these messages are, because God has always put us right on the cuspis, the leading edge of the events right before they happen. And it couldn't be timed any more important than they are today. When you see this message today, you understand what I'm talking about. I will be on shaky ground, not scripturally, but on subjects that could offend people. So I want to say this now. I'll say it loud and clear right from the beginning. Issues that affect people's lives are at stake. And I believe what God is showing us today is the forerunner of the end time, of how it's going to be to God's elect when we have to go against the whole world and stand up for what God says to do. And what I'm going to do today, I'm going to talk about subjects. I'm going to take them, what I've been doing, taking them out of the political arena and put them into the spiritual realm and apply them to scriptures. That way we take the scripture today where the Bible is not then and there, it's here and now. This is what we need to understand. At some point in time, we began saying this 8, 10, 12 years ago, that there'd be coming a time that events in the world is going to begin to shape that's going to affect everybody's lives. I believe we're at the beginning of that time. All right, so now, let's go on. We began with the very first of the series. It was called Conspirators of a Fallen Nation. We talked about how did America get to the condition it was? How do we go from a nation bound its duty, its love of God, its service to mankind in the generosity and love that we have, to a nation that seems to be filled with so much anger and hate and the ferociousness of anyone who disagrees with their point of view? How do we go from that point to this point? And we went through that series and we showed how through the silence of not standing for what God says to do, we have allowed evil to flourish. The second one, we talked about breaking the pride of our power. And we went into how the words shifted by understanding the Hebrew roots and how it brings us into understanding today of how God says, well, he's breaking the pride of the power is actually a separation of mankind from him. If you haven't got those two series, you need to get them. If anybody's on this tape who gets this, you need to write in for them. I think for everybody here, from what I understand, they're on the table in the back. So if you've been waiting for those DVDs, you can pick up part 1 and part 2 today before you leave on your way out. Today, I want to cover a subject that's called Speak to Us Smooth Things. Speak to us smooth things. People don't want to hear things that upset them. They don't want to hear the truth. The pattern I've been using, I want to follow today. And in case you hadn't heard before part 1 and part 2, here's basically the pattern that we use, and I will use it again today. I'll go in through the biblical explanation of the meaning of what I just said. Speak to us smooth things. We want to give the biblical authority for what it is we're talking about when you apply it to today. The second is we give you some biblical examples of what took place in the past and how they apply today. And last, we take those scriptures and we put them to everyday way of life today and how they affect people's lives, especially going forward. This year could be one of the most volatile years in civil unrest since the 60s. Now, I'm saying that now, and people now are looking at the news and they're beginning to see that. But when you look back a month and a half ago, it wasn't like that. When we began this series, God led us into where it's going to be. And in fact, I said, are we entering the time of the 60s? Because I felt that. There was a spirit, there was an unrest, there was an evilness surging in people. And I said, wow, this is just like the 60s. And we began drawing the parallels of the church the ministry, the worldwide church of God, and the things that took place then and how the world was changing and how it looked like we're moving right back to that again today. There's two deeply rooted meanings that took place of why the spiritual unrest is beginning to be unleashed. Back in the 60s, it was the introduction. It wasn't approved until the 70s, but it was the introduction to abortion. That was the main one. But everything else had to change, and I'm going to show you today how all that changed by changing the hearts of people. And it was almost like God says, okay, this is the area you're moving to. I'm moving my peace away from this nation. And when God moves his peace away, take a look around the world at what some of those nations look like. The nations who don't follow God. You will begin to get a look at what America is going into. And today, again, the national approval of gay marriage. It's almost like God says, okay, you're on your own. And you're beginning to see what a nation's going to be like without God's protection and his peace on that nation. All right, so let's go on. Speak to us smooth things. That comes from a passage out of Isaiah. Isaiah chapter 30. I'm going to do one more thing here, so you can keep this in the tape because I got a lot to say today, and I don't know how my time's going to be, and I definitely want to keep an idea of my time. All right. I got about a 5-minute head start. So now I can go 60 minutes and still be under, I can go overtime now and still be under 60. I should have waited for another 30 minutes and did that. All right, Isaiah 30, verse 10. The verse basically is what I'm using. I'm pulling it out of the context, and we will go into the context of what this is. Here's what it says. Who say the seers who do not see, and the prophets, do not prophesy to us right things, speak to us smooth things, prophesy deceits. All right, this is the area I'm working in today. Now remember, I'm going to go through the explanation of the word. I'm going to go through the explanation of the context of where it's written, and then we're going to apply it to today. All right, that's the pattern we've been using. When you first think about this, the first thing came to my mind when I read that scripture, I think of Satan. I think of Satan. It says in Genesis 3, verse 1, it said, now the serpent was more cunning than any other beast of the field which the Lord had made. The word serpent comes from the word nakash, means smooth-spoken, the whispering enchanter. You kind of get the picture, you ever watch on TV in the cartoons, the guy's thinking about something, you got the little devil on the one side, and you got your conscience on the other. And so the devil says he was more cunning, he was very crafty, he was very slick. And he was telling smooth things. Remember he told him, said, no, you can go ahead and eat of that tree, you're not going to die. God knows better than that. And so he's able to take people through smooth words. But now let's actually take a look at what the word is and see what we're talking about. Because you see, this passage of Isaiah is not talking about back in Genesis. It's talking about the future. So this applies to an end time. And I'm going to show you that's written right here in these verses when we get to them. The word comes from 25:13 in Strong's if you go and look. And I've been putting these foundational words in Strong's so that you will go back and start looking. And maybe what we ought to do again, we had done this a long time ago, maybe we ought to have a Bible study on how to use Strong's Concordance. That would really help a lot of people be able to do research on your own, where you can sit back and you can go back, you can look at the words, you can look at the meanings, and prove things out for yourself. So maybe we ought to talk about that this year. Anybody on the tape, you got to do that in your own area. Just actually sit down and have a Bible study. Show people how to use the Strong's Concordance. It's like a guide to all the words where you can go back and you can find them. The primary understanding of smooth, it actually means like flattery. All right, that's one of the primary uses, but that's not the primary intent of the word, believe it or not. I'm going to show you something. It's just like the last word when we went into the last chapter of the last part 2. Is sometimes we take things and we use one part of a passage and we apply that across the board. And so once we think we got an answer for everything, we quit looking. But that is certainly one of the meanings, and that's the meaning that's primarily used by most people, smooth things. But actually, it also means allotment and portion. allotment, and portion. Now, this is very important. When the phrase was said, speak to smooth things, what was God telling us there when the writer wrote it down? If you had a phrase that's used like today, he says, man, they look at a lady and say, wow, she's hot. Somebody goes say, they'll read it 100 years from now and say, wow, I wonder what the temperature was. It's like, wow, like 112 degrees. It was a phrase. It's a phrase that was used that they understood in Hebrew terms when they wrote it down. So now, the root word comes from Strong's 2505, okay, the root. All right, so when you get a root, everything has to go back to that home base, and then it breaks down how it's used by being an adjective, a noun, a pronoun, however it's used and applied. The change is just a little bit, but it always goes back. It never loses its core meaning. It always has that basis. All right, so now the root in Strong's 2505 means to apportion, to separate, to divide. Nothing smooth. There's no smooth out in that root word. So how do we get smooth out of that? What are we talking about from the same word? It's also translated flattery 6 times. All right, so there's something in there that's kind of brought us off where we think we got the word, but we don't really fully understand what it does. It came about from a Hebrew custom at the time, is that when they would separate or they would portion out things, they would cast lots. All right, so what they would do is the tradition is they would pick up smooth stones, and they would use the smooth stones to cast lots. And so when it says, speak to us smooth things, or so, we want to hear the smooth things, it was a phrase that was like a separation. In other words, give us smooth things. No, that separation. In other words, we want all these problems. We don't want political, correctness. We don't want to be against political correct. We want to be where we all can just agree and get along. But what God's telling us, when you use smooth things, when you cast your word with smooth things, what they were saying, what God's actually showing you in Isaiah, you have just separated yourself from the truth. When they said, speak to us smooth things, God's showing you from the root word that you have just apportioned of the truth. You have just separated, or you have just created a division between you and God. When this nation stands on political correctness rather than speaking the truth, it separates itself from God. That's the meaning behind Isaiah in that one word. But that's just the one word. Now let's look at the contents of what it is. All right, speaking us to smooth things. Let me show you. I'm going to give you 2 examples of what I'm talking about with that same word. Where it says smooth, watch this. In Genesis is the first time that same word is used. It says, he divided his forces against them by night, and he and his servants attacked them and pursued them as far as Hobah. So where's smooth things? It's the same word in this sentence. If you go looking for it, it's right there. Same word that we just read, smooth. The root word says he divided his forces. See, it separated itself. So we missed the context of what God intended for us to understand in Isaiah. Deuteronomy 29. It says, for they went and they served other gods and worshipped them, gods whom they knew not and whom they had not given unto them. Where's the root word for smooth? It's in that sentence also. It's at the bottom. Had not given. That is the phrase that comes out of the word that we had just read, 2505, that's the root word for smooth. So when you're talking about smooth things, without realizing it, while we try to make things smooth, we don't ruffle the feathers. The truth is, the point is that anytime you differ from the truth, you have just separated. You have not done your job. And so we live in a world that has been conditioned for the last 50 years to speak smooth things because we don't want to ruffle anyone's feathers. And so what that has done from us as a nation, it has laid the roots for the foundation for separation from God. Do you realize in the 60s had America stood up and the Christian movement, not just the Church of God, the Christian movement would have stood up and said, we will not stand for this. It would have never passed. And I'm going to show you they were silenced before we got to that stage. So now, let's go back to Isaiah again, verse 10. It says, do not prophesy us right things. Speak to us smooth things, things that prophesy deceit. Now let's look at the next word in here, deceit. All right, deceit, it's maha'ala, which means it's only used one time, means delusional. Now tell us smooth things, let us live a lie. Let us live in a world of delusion. So when we look at society today, they're living in a world that's non-existent, whether they realize it or not. And that's why you're beginning to see this insurgence of violence now beginning to rise to the surface, is that they're living in a world that no longer exists. They're living in a comfort zone of just the world of gimme, and I want what I want, and I want it now, which I'm going to talk about next time. You know, lovers of self, and how that applies to today, and how that root now, and that's being taken away. What people have gotten used to no longer exists. No longer exists. So if we were going to use the scriptures and we were going to apply it today, what would that scripture really mean? How would we read that in a modern term? I'll come to that in just a minute. Let's go back 2 verses and we'll begin reading the context of where, in the middle of where that's written in verse 8. It says, go now and write before them on a tablet and note it on a scroll, that it may be for a time to come. Now, when he wrote it, that wasn't for that time. That was for the future. And I believe what we're looking at here applies to us today. And I think God's given us the insight. He says he'll do nothing lest he reveal his secret unto his servants first. And I think God's people better take notice. They better take notice now that this nation is changing, and it's changing fast. And so what's going to come is not going to be good. And you're beginning to see that anger. Just today, Audrey was telling me, she heard it on the way over here, and the rallies, like with Donald Trump, where he's holding them now. Now the people are amassing and blocking interstates. They're jumping on cars. They're blocking buildings. And we have just moved into the time of the 60s. And this is just beginning. By the time this summer is over, this nation will see violence like it has not seen in 50 years. I believe that with all my heart. I believe that with all my heart. It says that this is a rebellious people. Interesting. Rebelling. You don't agree with me? That's it. We're going to stop this. Death threats have already been made. Death threats have already been made. This is a rebellious people. Lying children. Children who will not hear the law. Now, this is in the context of speak to us smooth things. This is the personality of those who deny God and his laws, who say to the seers, do not see, and to the prophets, do not prophesy to us right things, speak to us smooth things, preach to us deceits. What would be a modern translation? This is just mine. Do not prophesy us right things, speak to us things that are politically correct. Don't offend anybody. Be nice. In other words, let us have our way. And we're seeing now a nation of 50 years that has gotten its way. And when the truth raises its head, there's an anger that is unbelievable. And believe it or not, it is the same anger that was at the time of Christ. And when we bring this to a close today, I will bring us to the time of Christ. Because there's 2 things at stake. The example of Christ and the example of Christ's second coming. And Satan knows he has but a short time. All right? That we may live in a world of delusion. That's just my version. I just threw a modern translation in. You know, don't tell us things that offend us. You know, tell us things that are politically correct so we can live in this delusional world. And that's the nation we live in. Going on. God says, get out of the way. Turn aside from the path and cause the Holy One of Israel to cease from before us. This was it telling God. We don't want to hear what you got to say. We don't want to hear your prophets. We don't hear anything about the truth. Just get away from us and cease from being. Hasn't that what our nation has done? We have deliberately gone out of our way to remove God from this nation. And this nation needs to be told. Verse 12, therefore, thus says the Lord, it says the Holy One of Israel. Now God's about to speak. That's all the people. It says, because you despise his word, this word, and trust in oppression and perversity and rely on them. God says, because this is what you trust in. So I had a question. If I look around the nation today, how is a nation like as we are, trusting in oppression and perversity? How do you trust in that as this nation? Now, if I went out there and I would talk to the people and I said, listen, you're living in oppression, it would be just like talking to the Pharisees at the time in Christ says, what are you talking about? We're not under bondage. We're free. I would rile up a lot of people. But that's exactly what's going on right now. So how does that work today? More importantly, how does it fit into the sermon today? Speak to us smooth things. How do people today trust in oppression and perversity in our society? So let's define oppression. Now, let's begin by defining oppression. Because if you can't define the root causes, you're never going to address the issue. The definition for oppression means prolonged cruel or unjust treatment or control. Well, that doesn't go on in America, does it? Oh, yeah, absolutely. Let's break that down. It also means some synonyms: repression, suppression, subjection, cruelty, injustice, hardship, suffering. Go out on the street and ask anybody if they're going through hardship. You ask them better yet, what are you doing about getting out of it? See, they don't have an answer. Why? Because they've been conditioned to receive the trust in the oppression. How do you get oppressed? How does someone control a person's life? 50 years of change, and I'm going to show you that in just a second. How do you do this in a free society like America? How does a society of hundreds of millions of people put themselves in subjection to oppression and live there? That is what we're facing today. And this is why, at the root cause of all the problems, the fear of losing what they trust in is now coming to the surface. That's what's going on. All right, so God says we don't wrestle against flesh and blood. We're wrestling against the principalities, the prince of the power of the airways today. That's what we're wrestling against, going forward and being brought to the surface. It's part of what's called the law of self-preservation. The law of self-preservation. This is very important. People are striving to preserve their way of life that has done what? That has brought about oppression. It's amazing. The fear of giving up the oppression, they would rather do that. So when someone tries to walk them to a better way, to the truth, the self-preservation comes out. People turn their lives over to someone or some government who will take care of them. And depending on how that government handles those people, they live under the limits of that control. They live under the limits of that control. They turn over control of their lives that keeps them in an oppressed state. Talk to the poor. Talk to those on welfare. They can't go get jobs. In their mind, they're locked in. Why? Because if they go get jobs, they make less money. So they lock themselves into living in a life that someone hands them what they will have. And that's as far as they can go. So then they have to live in a life of deceit and lies and sneak around to get things that they can't have any other way. It's amazing how people feel that way. So what happens when that security is challenged or taken away? Because that's where we're in the beginning of. The money train is beginning to run out. The money train is beginning to run out. The law of self-preservation. It says the first law of nature is self-preservation. Cut off that which may harm you. Cut off that which may harm you, whether it's real or it's perceived to be. If someone is going to affect your way of life, cut it off. Let's reverse this now. We're talking about the poor. Let's talk about the government and the rich. What if there's somebody who's coming on the scene who threatens their way of life? Cut off that which may harm you. That's the law of self-preservation. All right? That's the law of self-preservation. Upsetting the apple cart. The civil unrest today and the election takes place in 3 areas. All right? The first area is voters taking on government leadership as it stands today in Washington. All right? I'm going to briefly cover that because that subject would take me more than I can get time to do it here. I mean, besides, that's not really a subject I just want to get into in a sermon, but I need to address it because that's part of the core issue of the problem we face in America today. The second is other governments taking advantage of the American trade. Because you see, what's going on now is that the governments around the rest of the world are fearing that their, oh, I don't have it up there no more, self-preservation is gone. All right? In other words, they have to cut off the problem. That's why do you think so many other countries now are chiming into this election? Because now it's beginning to affect what they perceive their way of life. And last, those in America who are receiving government support. All right, so just let me take the first one just for a second here. The voters taking on the government leadership. Basically, in this election, the government's lost. The insiders in government have lost. Everyone that they have put in place to run the country next has been basically voted out. They have not been a part, and believe it or not, I don't know how the Democratic side stays. And let me say that one more time. This is not to decide for Republican, Democrat, or support, deny. It's simply going through what we're talking about to get to the core issues that affect people's lives spiritually of where we're going. But I need to discuss these things, so I'm not supporting. In fact, if anybody wants to support, that's up to you. You know, the church used to say you can't vote, you can't do this, you can't do that. Well, really, that's up to you. That's your choice. Here's where I stand so you'll know where I'm coming from. God is in charge. He will place who He will in the next office. All right? That's where I stand. So what I like or I don't like, that makes no difference in God's plan. All right? So if a person wants to be out there and they want to campaign, that's between you and God. And I'm not saying do and I'm not saying don't. I'm telling you, I believe God's word and I believe He's in charge. And when that government comes back, I will vote for Christ. Yeah. Until then, I'm out the picture. All right? So I can't be any plainer than that, but I need to discuss the issues. All right, so you see where I'm coming from. All right, so the first is the government is out. So what are we looking at? The self-preservation from the government. You've got lobbyists. You got corporations. You got trillions of dollars of money being funded all over the place. You got government officials who go in with a meager salary, come out multimillionaires. Everything they've got now is on the line. Why? Because somebody came in and says, I don't want your money, and you're not going to tell me what to do. Well, now they fear somebody's not going to be able to be controlled. Cut off that which affects my life, is what it says. All right, so now you're beginning to see all this stuff coming to the surface. Like, wow. All right, as long as we were in control and we had it our way and nobody upset the apple cart, we got along. Right? All right, so now, other governments taking advantage of the American trade. All right, so now you've heard about the trade imbalance now that's finally come out. And we've talked about this in this message many years. And now watch, I'm going to show you something right here. Bear with me a second. Come on here with the camera with our new studio set. I love it, I love it, I love it. Watch this. All right. All right. Now here we go. Take about 10 seconds. We just expand our reach. All right. Now we're ready to go. Now we just added a new dimension to the sermon. Just that fast. Isn't that amazing? That is so exciting. I've been waiting months to do that. I have nothing to say over here. I just wanted to do this. I'm just kidding you. No, I got a lot to say about this. In fact, I made some notes. Let me get my notes. Why do we have trade imbalance? You know, the trade imbalance averages, you ready for this? $600 to $700 billion a year out of the American economy. All right, out of the American economy, 600, 700 billion. So about every 1.4 to 1.6 years, we lose $1 trillion. You realize that? $1 trillion every 1.4 every 1.6 years on trade imbalance. So I'm looking at this for years, and I've been talking about the economics for years. So I'm looking at all of these things, and I go, why are we doing that? So why do we do that? People tell us this: for jobs. Really? So that's what we're doing for jobs, right? What if the jobs we're doing it for isn't American jobs? Yeah. So, whoa. So here's what we're doing. We're saying we're spending every year and a half or so $1 trillion out of the American economy for jobs that primarily go to another nation. Now have we got a problem? The business is saying, you got to cut that. Don't talk about stuff like that. This is our business. We have, took up all the space Danny gave me because Danny made me a nice board here. I done used up all this free space he gave me. All right, let's see if I can write this in here. 358 companies who are holding $2.1 trillion overseas. All right, so now we're doing it for jobs. So that means all these countries who are holding that money is offshore, where most of it now is no taxes on. Who's paying for this trillion? We are. The American people paying for that loss, right? So what happened to free trade? It ain't free trade. That free trade costs us that much money every year and a half or so. That's what it costs us. Now, that's 358 companies. I'll just tell you because I don't have nowhere to write. Out of those 358 companies, there's 7,622 companies, companies that those companies own that keeps money offshore too. 7,622, and that's from a CNBC report last year in October. I'm not making these figures up. Trillions of dollars. So now, let's talk about this. All right, jobs. The jobs. Of those companies, many of the largest companies now manufacture overseas. Overseas. To Japan, to Mexico. So now, not only do we subsidize the loss in money, the American jobs go to their companies overseas. So when they ship things and the companies are being sold, all the money, all the profits, all the work is now from these companies stays in those companies, in those countries. That's free trade. And this is why it's been brought to the surface, and this is why these countries are now saying, you need to shut that man up. What man? How about the American people? How about the American people say, listen, what about America? What about the freedom God gave us? All right? So now, that's the second. It's more in depth than that. I know it's more in depth. I just want to give you a top of what's going on. That you can see for yourself. You put that in perspective that how many jobs would that put in America? How many jobs in America? If we took of all that money that we have this trade imbalance and we put it back in America for the American people, all you need to do is tell the companies, listen, we're gonna be fair to you too. We're gonna cut you taxes. We're gonna make it fair so you can compete. Believe me, if America stood up like it did in the 40s and the 50s and it trusted God rather than man's doctrines, these other nations would be afraid to fight with America. They need America more than we need them. They don't know that because we have been so conditioned in the last 50 years to say, we need them. So why do we do the imbalance? Because we need them. We need the jobs. We need the income. Well, we don't have the jobs. We don't have the income. So they're not there. And so it's so simple when you put it in black and white, but when somebody finally gets a chance to speak that up, stop it. You got to stop that. All right, let's go to the next one. How about those in America receiving government support? All right. How about those? Now listen, I'm going to say this. There are people who need help. You know, I'm all for that. You know, I don't have a problem with helping people who need help. I believe there's many people who need the Social Security welfare, not just Social Security, but you need government help, because I feel sorry for the elderly who's got to sell and mortgage their homes in advance in what they call reverse mortgages, so they can get enough money just to pay for medical expenses. So we sold our future out. Let me show you this. Here's a chart with the American debt clock. I don't know if everybody's actually seen this. So what I'm going to do just right now, just for a second, then I'm going to get back into it. I'm going to get out of that, and then I'm going to pull up a live version of the U.S. debt clock. Can y'all see that? You can see it better up there. But anyway, and then I'm going to go back to it. But the U.S. debt clock, these are figures that are put out by the U.S. government themselves. If you've never seen this, you can go online, you can find it, you can type it in. And look how fast the debt is running. That's $19,118 billion. The average, I think they said $1.4 billion a day, just the interest we're paying right now, is going through every single day. And you go through this and you watch all these things that continue to change. And it's really interesting. So now let me go back into the PowerPoint, because I've got some things I marked in that I wanted to bring up, to bring out to you right now, to show you how bad the things have gotten in America. This is why I'm saying it isn't about one's voice. It's about things coming to an end. This is what's going on, and God's letting God's people take a look at this, because you need to get ready for this. Silver and gold's already started its climb. In the last month, silver's gone up almost $3, and gold's going back up again. I think those areas have bottomed out. The volatility in the stock market's going up, and now you say, "Wow, the stock market's doing great again." It's already now it's above what it was at the beginning of the year. It's not going to happen. It's not good right now what's going on. So now let's look at this. 46 million people right now are living in poverty. 46 million people. 41 million nearly have no insurance. I thought Obamacare took care of that. No, you've been lied to again. This is the government's records. This isn't Tom's. Almost 41 million have no insurance. Medicare. There are more people on Medicaid that the government's paying for, 73 million on Medicaid, than Medicare, where people pay into. All right, 73 million people receive Medicaid. That's government money. 73 million people. Total receiving benefits in America, 161 million Americans receive government benefits. When you see this many people whose their lives are threatened, when you begin to see the money drying up, that there's no more food stamps. By the way, food stamps, almost 45 million people receiving food stamps. How well are we doing as a nation? Everything we have in this nation is part of that facade that doesn't exist. It's all on borrowed time and borrowed money. All right, next. This is across the bottom of that chart, right? This is across the bottom of that chart. I brought it up to the top. The budget gap, $5.8 trillion. But you say, well, but they only budgeted, they said it was $4 trillion this year. No. Every time they give you a figure, there's more money that's put into it that they're spending that's not accounted for yet because it's incurred to later years. This year, $5.8 trillion budget gap. That's how much money they're taking in versus what they're spending. You realize that? You can't cover that kind of money. It's impossible. You can put the nations in the world together, they're not going to cover this kind of stuff. All right, Social Security liabilities. They say it's going to run out. It probably will. Medicare liabilities. U.S. unfunded liabilities that doesn't fit into any of these categories that the government says, okay, we're going to pay for this, that Congress has already passed, has already began putting out that they don't have the money for, $101 trillion. That's the government figures. And that's conservative. I don't even think that's accurate. All right, liability per taxpayer, if we come and everybody in America paid the bill, you ready for this? You owe, in your taxes, somewhere down the road, or your children, $848,000. Every American in this nation owes that much money to pay that bills. So they're gonna come get you $848,000 and pay the bill. Going on. This is interesting. There's only unemployment. We're touting in the government how great we're doing with the government, and unemployment is down to 4.9, 4.8%. Isn't that great? Here's what the government really says. The workforce today now, we're at 151,000. The workforce in 2000 was 154. We got 3,000 less people working today than we had 300,000 working, not 3 million less working today. You know, yeah, it's 3 million. I couldn't even say it. 3 million less working today than they did in 2000. But look at a labor force that's not in the labor force. 93 million people are not in the labor force. We have less people working in 2000. Look at the little circle I put around here. The U.S. population is 323,000 people. And out of that, paying taxes to cover all them bills, there's only 119,000 people paying taxes. Almost a third of the people who live here, there's no taxes being paid. Are you putting this together in your head? I hope it's ringing through. This is the government. These are government figures. Not in the labor force, almost 94 million people that's not working, getting government benefits, or sitting home, or just decide I can't get a job. I ain't doing nothing. I'm just not going to do anything. You realize that? We have more people in America today than in 2000, but less working today than in 2000, and it's the lowest work participation since the 70s. You can't, so in other words, less money is going into the pot to give away. And in the elections, in many of the sides, many of them saying, we're going to give you free this, we're going to give you free that. Oh, really? Where are you going to get it from? Well, we're just going to add it to that bottom line. Doesn't matter. We just keep borrowing, printing money. Going on. The official unemployment, 7,700,000. It's great, 4.8%. Now, they tout you that, and on their own paperwork, they're telling you the actual number is 15 million not working. But in the reality, the true figure we just left, 93 million are not working. What is the percentage of 93 million people not working? Amazing, right? I've got here an audio soundbite. Do we have that ready to play? This runs around 6 minutes or so. This is a real taped audio conversation to a radio station that talks about the government benefits and why a person should work or not work. Okay?
Coming up on News Radio KLBJ
748.
Lacey is calling from Riverside. Hi, Lacey. Welcome. Lucy. You're on KLBJ.
Hi, how are you?
Fine, Lucy.
Good morning.
I just wanted to say, while workers out there and people like you that are preaching morality at people like me living on welfare, can you really blame us? I mean, I get to sit home. I get to go visit my friends all day. I even get to smoke weed. Me and people that I know that are illegal immigrants that don't contribute to society, we still going to get paid. Our check's going to come in the mail every month, and it's going to be on time, and we get subsidized housing. We even get presents delivered for our kids for Christmas. Why should I work? So you know what? Y'all get the benefit of, saying, oh, look at me, I'm a better person. But when y'all sitting back talking about how y'all a better person because y'all go to work, we're the ones getting paid. So can you really blame us?
Are you talking on an Obama phone as well?
How much
yeah,
do you...
I got an Obama phone.
How much have you added up the total of what you get each month, Lucy?
No, I haven't.
But what do you get? Just quickly go down the list of the things you get from the taxpayers.
Well, I only have to pay $50 a month for rent. Mm-hmm. And it's supposed to be $600 and something. So there's $550 right there.
Yes.
I get $425 a month for food stamps. I get $150 a month paid on my electric bill. I get my cell phone. and then I get $100 a month paid towards my water.
And that's from the city of Austin?
Yes.
Do you have any kids, Lucy?
I have 3 kids.
And does your husband work?
He'll work every now and then part-time, but he doesn't work very much.
Does
He just doesn't really see the need for it.
Does he get benefits as well?
Yeah.
So those
are family benefits.
Those are family benefits. And Lucy is asking everyone listening right now, why should she get up and drive in the rain to work all day and pay taxes when she can get this kind of help from those of you going to work?
You know, and I do have a question for you, Lucy. Now, from time to time, if you have an opportunity and somebody pays you cash, do you work?
I have a couple of times, yeah.
Sure.
Lucy, don't you feel guilty about gaming the system and taking everybody else's money just because you can lay down and watch TV on Riverside Drive every dang day of the year?
Smoke weed?
But, you know, if somebody offered you $1 million, would you walk away from it? I mean, it's easy to preach morality, and it's the only reason why I called. It's easy to say, well, yeah, you know, you're making your living off of other people's backs. But, you know, if somebody gave you $1 million and said, here, you ain't got to work for it, no strings attached, here, just take it. Do whatever you want to do with it. You would take it, too.
Mm-hmm.
Lucy.
Okay, so they're not giving me $1 million all in my pocket up front, but over my lifetime, how much money is that going to be? And I don't have to work for it.
So you don't.
That's what I'm saying. Y'all can preach about morality, but the system's there. It's available, and people like me, at least I'm an American citizen. What about all these people that are illegal immigrants who don't do anything at all, and they just come here and they even work and they make money, and you go down to the WIC office, and that's the other thing, you know, WIC.
Yeah.
Over 80% of those people are not even American citizens. We give them welfare, and then they can go to college for free.
Lucy,
I can't even go to college for free.
Lucy, hang on a second. How old are you, ma'am?
I'm 32.
And you, it sounds as though you intend to stay on welfare your entire life, if possible.
Yes.
The rest of your life.
Yeah.
Were your mom and dad on welfare, Lucy?
Yeah, they did.
They were on welfare too.
That kind of makes sense.
Do you want your 3 children to live on welfare when they grow up?
You know, I really don't know. I mean, if they want to work, that's fine. But I mean, I wouldn't mind if they worked. I mean,
that kind of makes me
as long as they can get a really good job, something they were happy with.
But don't you look at me? I get up and work every day. At my age, I'm kind of stupid then. You know, because I'm making all that money.
Lucy, Sam gets up at 2:30 every morning and drives in here to work.
Yeah. So
but
I guess I'm dumb.
To do that.
Yeah,
that's
I choose.
the price he pays for being able to say, "Look at me, I'm a good person."
But the government puts a gun to my.
It's about choices. It's not that makes him bad or me bad. It's just he chooses because he has that, you know, the thing about, look at me, I'm a good person. I go to work. And I'm on the opposite end. I see myself as a good person. I don't do anything wrong. I don't do anything hurt anybody.
You don't think it's doing anything wrong by taking Lucy, you don't think it's wrong by taking money from the city and the state and the federal government, other people's tax money that we put into the system, and you're taking it every month to the tune of $1,300 a month? You get I figure you get about $1,300 a month.
Well, if somebody gave you $1 million, would you take it?
I earned my money, Lucy.
I see her point. And we're the ones that are the saps, and it needs to stop. Now, if your money was cut off, would you get up and go to work?
Yeah, if it was cut off, I would have to.
Well, I think that's what needs to happen, because we're dumb. See, the government puts a gun to my head, and with a promise of imprisonment if I don't pay taxes. Does anybody put a gun to your head to take that money? Nope.
And if you find that guy who's going to give us $1 million, call us. Tell us.
Working.
Yeah, tell that guy to call me.
You know, Lucy, I do appreciate your honesty. I really do.
Yeah.
How many people?
I mean, that's my whole point. If I was in a position where I had to work, I mean, that might be a different story. But not only do I not have to work, they're always, when you're in these programs, they're always coming to you and offering you more programs, and a lot of times shoot, they'll even pay you to go to these programs. These hey, we'll give you some money, we'll give you this, we'll give you that. And so they encourage you to stay on the programs. And then if you do try to get off of them, they penalize you anyway. Well, if you go out and you make $10, they're going to deduct $20 for you making that 10. So you really can't get off of it. And then, like, say someone like me wants to go to work. Well, then if I went to work, every dime I would make would go to child care anyway. So why work?
Oh man, Lucy.
Well, it's a vicious circle.
Lucy.
It's a vicious circle. I certainly understand.
It's not a vicious circle, Sam.
It is, Ed. It's because we have a government that gives Lucy everything she needs, and because they want your vote, don't they, Lucy?
All right.
Yep.
All right.
Lucy,
If that doesn't make your head spin,
get
out
a better
of control.
example for your children, Lucy, please. We need that in our society.
All right, 7:55 now at KLBJ. You can get in here and join us as well. 512-836-0590.
And the point is that all this money that's being spent is running out. And so what's going to happen is we've created a society that lives, remember what the word was, oppression? How are people living under the oppression? Well, they have placed themselves into a position that they can only do so much under the disguise of being helped. And so what we're talking about in what we're beginning to see is this civil unrest is that the way of life of 161, in this chart that I showed, 161 million people is going to be coming to an end. And if you think people are angry now, when they have no food to eat and they don't have a place to live and they're so used to getting things their way, there's going to be more than just civil unrest. And I'm telling you now, God's people need to get ready. It could be next year, 2 years, 10 years around. I don't know how long it's going to be. But the gravy train and the money is over. And you're beginning to see now, because there are people speaking up and saying we've had enough, you're beginning to see these two spirits now beginning to merge. And they're going to clash. Is the spirit that God says, my people know my voice, and Satan who says, I know I have but a short time. And those two spirits are merging. Now, out of all that money, this thing goes on for about 6 or 7 minutes, and I didn't see the point to go on it. They made a lot more excellent points. So when you get the DVD, we'll put the whole thing on there so that you can hear it all. But it's pretty much recounting the same thing, and they're going back and they're discussing things. They didn't even discuss insurance. When people buy insurance today, you're at $5,000, $6,000, $7,000, $8,000. Families at $10,000, $12,000, $15,000, $5,000 deductibles. People just can't have it. 41 million people without the insurance. And so what you're seeing is what I'm bringing out today is I'm trying to show that the speak to us smooth things is over. And what God says is going to be the civil unrest. Now, let's go through now. Let's put these pieces together for events taking place today and put them into Scripture, what took place in Christ's day and what's coming forward. All right. This is verse 13. This is still in the same context. We started in verse 8, went to 9, 10, 11, 12. Now we're in verse 13. Then God says, therefore, this iniquity shall be to you like a breach ready to fall. What am I showing you? I'm showing you what the Scripture says is coming. Like a breach that's ready to fall. It's ready to fall. All right? Matthew 15 says this, these people draw near to me with their mouth and honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. So we have a nation that has the appearance of being godly. You turn on TVs, you watch some of them in these stadiums with 40,000 people. You got other churches with 15, 20,000 people going. But the nation is falling on, collapsing on its own weight of immorality. So God says, you draw to me with the mouth, but they just honor me with their lips. But their hearts are far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching the doctrines, the commandments of men. People today approach God with flatteries. They think they can tell God what God wants to hear. They give God the smooth things, and they think that God's going to listen to them. They make bargains with God. If you do this for me, then I'll do this. Now, I'm here to tell you, it don't work that way. God says, this is the way, walk ye in it. And if you want God to hear you, you better be walking the way God says to walk. Our society today lives in the circle of deceit. honors me with their lips. Let's talk about that for a second. Isaiah 29 says in verse 13, therefore, the Lord says, inasmuch as these people draw near to me with their mouths. In other words, we have the appearance, all right? So we have the appearance of a godliness. You know, people go to church every week. They do the things they're supposed to be doing. So, but their hearts are removed. He said, in other words, these people don't really, their heart isn't in what I tell them to do. And their fear toward me is taught by the commandment of men. You talked about people today, they're not afraid. They're not afraid of God. They're not afraid to talk about immorality and living with other people, lying, cheating, stealing, the drugs. The TVs are filled with it. There's no fear of God. So why? Because they listen to man's laws. And man's law says, that's okay, you can do whatever you want to. God will forgive you. Somewhere along the line, our nation has been transformed from a nation under God to a counterfeit faith that only has the appearance of God. God's response in Isaiah 29, where we just were, therefore, God gives us a therefore. Whenever you receive therefore, so God's saying, because of this, this is what's coming. He says, I will do a marvelous work among this people, a marvelous work and a wonder. And I covered that word marvelous a while back, so I'm not going to go in detail there. But it doesn't mean like the British phrase saying, aren't we having a marvelous time? No, this marvelous means a wonder, like a bizarre, like I can't believe what I'm seeing. That God's saying. He says, because you have removed your hearts from me, therefore I'm going to do this. So we're beginning to see, when you look at the news and you begin to see what's going to begin uprising, especially this season, this summer, and what's coming, you're going to be shocked. Because God says it's going to be a marvelous and a wonder. And you're going to wonder, what are people thinking? You know, how can they come to this kind of perverseness? It says, for the wisdom of the wise men shall perish. Their understanding of the prudent men shall be hidden. So God's removing our leadership. You look at the guys who began to run for office in this election, you say, we've got to have better than this. But no, anybody who's wise is smart enough not to get into that arena. But in it all, the people who actually rose their voice up and said, listen, enough is enough, they're now being attacked. And it's not going to be a pretty sight, what's coming at all. Prudent. It says the understanding of their prudent men shall be hidden. Prudent means acting with or showing care or forethought for the future. Let me ask you something. When I brought that chart and you showed all that's going on over there and all the money that's being spent, is there any thought to the future? No. There's no prudent men up there in Washington. They just spent an agreed $4.2 trillion. And I just showed you it's actually 5.7 already, but they agreed to spend 4.7 because you got these hidden costs that's going in there. So nobody's thinking about the future. It's what's in it for me now is what's going on. And the people's had enough. They can see the handwriting on the wall. And those who raise their voice are clashing with those who want to keep the status quo. That's going on right now. Synonyms for prudent would be wise, sensible, prudent, judicious, shrewd, circumspect, thrifty. Now, wouldn't that be a neat one in Washington? Have somebody that's actually thrifty. You know, it doesn't matter how much you spend as long as it isn't my money. Spend someone else's is what they're... Remember Margaret Thatcher said, you know, socialism is great till you run out of other people's money. Says their hearts are far from me. So to change the heart of a people, you must first change the mindset of the people. So the mindset, you have to start thinking differently if you change the heart. And in the first sermon we did, we brought in the Scope trials, remember? And so that began to change the mindset of the people way back in 1925 when people said, well, maybe there is another way. Maybe it wasn't God. Maybe there was evolution. By 1928, 29, they began to accept it in America. What else happened about that time? It's called the Great Depression. Every time you see the nation as a whole accept things that are not God's, you begin to watch that nation begin to collapse upon its own weight. We saw it back there. And what else happened? We seen beginning in 1954 when the pulpits were silenced by what's called the Johnson Amendment. We brought this out in part one. If you haven't got part one, you need to get it. And it was an amendment to the 501c3s that the churches were, the donations came to them were tax exempt from the people so they could save some money, put some money into the churches. Well, in 1954, Senator Johnson, who became President Johnson with Kennedy later, on the assassination, at that time silenced the pulpit, said that if you talk about the leadership and the future leaders of America, we're going to take away your rights to receive the money and the tax exemption. It's going to hurt your organization. So the pulpits went silent. They went silent. And so when it was time to speak up, they were so conditioned, they never spoke up. And so the 60s rolled in and rolled out without the surge of the awareness of the pulpits, who used to actually guard and nurture the nation from its foundation. They were gone. They were silenced. The changes in the 60s came in. So now I ask, is history repeating itself? This is where we close the first one. Edmund Burke wrote, "All that is necessary for triumph to evil is that good men do nothing." So if we just do nothing, it will continue to get the way it's going. It will get worse. He also wrote, "Whenever a separation is made between liberty and justice." And so what the silence is you silence the justice for your liberty. It says when that happens, neither one is safe. So we began to see that separation in the 60s taking place. He also went on to write this about freedom and bondage. He wrote this about leadership, and I thought this was quite apropos. So when you get this DVD, I hope you'll stop it when I get the whole thing written up and ponder what he wrote here, because it's astounding what he wrote. He says, "Men are qualified for civil liberty in exact proportion to their disposition to put moral chains upon their own appetites." Now, you're going to have to go back and read this, because this is profound. People who have the civil liberty and are in leadership, if they can't put a blanket on their own appetite for their own welfare, they have no business serving. We don't have a nation of leadership like that anymore. It says, "In proportion as their love is to justice is above their rapacity." Now, what is rapacity? The rapacity is the eagerness, the ferociousness to good things for yourself. All right? In proportion to the love and the justice above the rapacity. In proportion to their soundness and sobriety and understanding is above vanity and presumption. In other words, you're putting the cause above yourself. In proportion as they become more disposed to listen to the counsels of wise and good in preference to the flattery of caves or dishonest and unscrupulous men. People surround themselves with flatteries of dishonest men. They've lost the wisdom of being able to separate. Now, what's interesting is what he wrote here is disposed to listen to the counsels of wise men. Remember, we just went through this just a few minutes ago. God says he would remove our wise men. The wise shall perish. In other words, because they haven't stood with God, God has removed the wisdom of the wise men to guide and direct the nation. And that's where we are today. The discernment of the spirits. People say they have discerning of spirits. But believe it or not, all of God's people should have the discernment of spirits. And I don't mean where you can just look at a person over there and say that guy's got evil in him or not. It's the discerning of the spirits is the Spirit of God in you should be able to discern between right and wrong. Everybody should have that. I mean, so that's not an unusual thing to talk about. Malachi 3:16 says this, "Then those who feared the Lord spoke often one to another, and the Lord listened and heard them, and so a book of remembrance was written before him for those that feared the Lord to meditate on his name." In verse 18, "And on that day," he says, "when I make up my Jews, I will spare them as a man spares his own son who serves him. And then you shall again discern between the righteous and the wicked, between one who serves and one who does not serve him." What God's telling us, without his power in the end times, you're not going to be able to discern between what's good and right and what's evil and bad. And so you talk to the people in the society today, they have been so conditioned what's right, they don't understand that what they think is right is hurting them. So they stay in subjection to bondage without ever realizing it. And if you try to move them out of that bondage, for them to stand on their own 2 feet, to go out and work for themselves and earn their own way, you will find the appetite of aggression, because they feel threatened. The changes in America, is history repeating itself? We have come 180 degrees from a nation of godliness where morals was respected and admired, to a nation where the same values of morals are now considered as bigotry, racist, and judgmental. You don't have to have change, but the same values now have reversed themselves completely. From being a moral person to now has become racist, bigoted, and judgmental. Look what God says about that. Woe to those who call evil good and good evil. In other words, God's not taking that lightly. Iniquity, in other words, lawlessness. When these events take place, God says iniquity or lawlessness shall abound. In fact, if you go into Matthew, where I pulled this from, it says, because iniquity shall abound, the love of many will wax cold. The love of many will wax cold. It's not going to be easy for God's people to stand their ground, to hold the line, to be able to do what God says to do, because it's going to be an evil time. But God says He'll protect His people. We need to understand that. We need to stand up and count the cost. History repeating itself again. The 60s was the generation of the beginning of the removal of God, the protest of free love and abortion. All right, so that's just the top. So the mindset began to change. That generation now is the people who are teaching this generation. So if you look at society today, in the schools, from the time they're children, that they give the books about two men living together and how wonderful that is, or two women living together as husband and wife. Now they're putting children in those people's homes and they're bringing them up. And so when you say, listen, God says that's not a moral way to live, the kids say, well, what's wrong with that? And so we have come full circle. This is a new generation now raising up with the same spirit of the 60s. So what's happened? We've had 50 years of total removal of the way of God's way and allowing the Satan way to come in, a way that does not produce benefits. We can go back, and God says you judge by the fruits. I just showed you the chart of all the economics. I can pull you up the charts and show you about the crime, about the abuses that's taking place, the sexual abuses, you name it, they're out there. We have more people in prison in America than any other nation in the world. You put it all together, you look at the fruits, and you see where we're at. And so when someone stands up and say, well, listen, we need to kind of put God back in the picture here, and you begin to find the rebellion of a child now who's had 50 years to have his own way. You ever take a child and he's had his own way, and you take that child from his parent and you want to teach it right? Man, you got problems on your hands. That kid throws fits, just absolute fits when he doesn't get his way. So what is the spirit of the 60s? It's an anti-spirit. All right? Anti-what? 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 It breaks down to one simple anti. It is the core of everything that's going on. It is the spirit that removes freedom. Now that's really simple. So that's almost too simple, but let me show you why I say that. It says, you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. If I was out now talking to people what the truth is, you want to be free? This is what God says. This is the way you must walk in. This is what you must do to change your life. This is what you need to repent of, and don't walk that way. That will set you free. Anything that is taught that way, anything against it is anti, and that will be the contrast. Why do I know that? Because the anti-movement, it was the time of Jesus Christ. He came to set them free. And they didn't want to hear it. Why? Because it had to remove the establishment. It had to, even with the people who didn't want him around. And then when the people rose up and they said, we had enough, we want Jesus, you saw what happened. How does that take place? Let's draw some similarities now. The silencing and intimidation of violence. Okay, I'm going to run a little over. I'm looking at the clock, but I think we can still done. But I want to get this. This is a tough subject, and it's a very touchy subject because, like I said, this is not a political subject, but it's a biblical subject that's touching on issues today that are political, that's changing people's lives and affect the future of this nation. And I'm trying to keep it in perspective of what God says. So silencing through intimidation or violence. You know, I tell people what I'm going to be speaking of. I've had people tell me, no, you don't want to touch that subject. It's going to bring persecution on the church. Yes, it will. But how do you not preach the truth? That's what Jesus Christ said. We must preach the truth. It says to creating the state of fear that controls people, and one of the control is being politically correct. You can't really go against anybody that's out there. So how do we come full circle from a nation of laws under God and godly values to a nation fundamentally changed by substituting man's laws? It says the fear today that is rising up in the people who have seen the demise of the nation, now raising their voices again to replace those values that were removed. In other words, we've tried it your way for 50 years now. We need to go back and do it another way. And the people don't want to hear that. So you see these two. It's called iconoclasm. You're seeing this iconoclast coming to a head. And we talked about that a couple of years, and I got a sermon called Iconoclast. You need to get that sermon. 2 years ago, we said this is coming. We are there. We are there now. Let me give you real quick some biblical parallels of the events in America today. All right? During the time of Christ, was the most important event of that day was to set man free at the stake. His cause was to come to live the godly life and to pay the price for sin. That was the only way to set man free. And Satan did everything in his power at that time to stop him. They beat him, they put him on the stake, they spit on him, they mocked him, they riled him to stop what he had to do. Today, before the return of Christ, freedom again is under attack. Satan says, the Revelation says he knows he has but a short time. So what's going to happen is going to rise up from where you see today so that eventually it will settle down. There will be a government in control and things will smooth, and then they will go after God's people because they will not settle down. They will continue to speak the truth. It will come under attack again. Why? Because Christ is coming back. And Satan must stop that if he thinks he's ever going to make it. He deceived himself. He lives a delusion too. What's under attack? The bottom line, the first thing that's going to have to go, and that's why this thing is so critical, what you're looking at in the elections as far as God's people, your freedom to speak. You know, last couple of years now, the UN has passed resolutions that if you brought out that speaking against Islam is considered hate laws. Do you know they had 49 votes in America to agree with that? Didn't get to pass yet, but it was that close. Now the Supreme Court, if it changes and the laws change that protect your freedom of speech and your freedom of religion, the right that God gave that protected us for all these years through the Constitution is over. So there's a lot at stake going on right now, whether we realize it or not. Let me give you examples in Christ's day. In Matthew 23, it says, "Woe to the scribes and Pharisees." The rebellion of the people and oppression at the time. Look what John 6 says. Then a great multitude followed him. What happens when you see great multitudes follow somebody that threatens their way of life? They want to stop it. That's going on in the political arena right now, believe it or not. Believe it or not. That's why I say this is touchy, but like I'm saying, I'm not pro anybody. I'm just pointing things out that are so biblical and parallel that they need to be understood. All right. So when they've seen all the multitudes following him, it says, and look at here, John 8. So when he came down from the mountain, great multitudes followed him. So it got the attention of the establishment of the day, saying, man, what's going on here? You know, we need to basically stop this. So the people raised up their voices to support the person who they thought understood this oppression. All right, so that's what was going on in Jesus' day. The example continues. So the people raised their voice to support the people who protected them. Look what it says in John now. We're bringing it closer to the time of the end of Jesus Christ. It says, on the next day, all right, this is after he was getting ready to come into Jerusalem. He was getting close to the time of the Passover and when he's going to be crucified. It says, on the next day, a great multitude that had come to the feast when they heard that Jesus was coming to Jerusalem. Now, we know the story, and you said the streets were filled, and they had Hosanna in the highest, and they put the palms out, and they had that game where the donkey would not even, his paw wouldn't even touch the ground. And all these people were coming through. And they took the branches of the palm trees, and they went to meet Jesus, and they cried out, Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, the King of Israel. Now, as soon as the Pharisees heard that, their hearts were like, what do you mean, King, the King of Israel? We're in charge of this. This is our ground. So the people believed that Jesus was coming to replace the rulership of that day. In Washington, all the establishment people now who are running for office, they've been kicked out. The people who are not on the inside now are still in the election, and they're scurrying around how they can stop this. Same way with the Pharisees in Jesus' day. You don't have to be a rocket scientist if you just understand the Bible. You know what's going to happen. You can follow the patterns. They're not hard to understand. So then comes to the suppression of the leadership to protect their interest. So now, it's phenomenal how they begin to change things around to find a way to stop those who threatens their way of life. Look what happened in Jesus' day. So the Pharisees therefore said among themselves, see that you're accomplishing nothing. They're talking amongst themselves. Say, look, we're not getting anything done here. What were they talking about? They were talking about an event that took place just a little bit before that, when Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead. Look what happened in John 11. So then from that day on, they plotted to put him to death. When they saw Jesus raise Lazarus from the dead, and all these people going after him, they knew their way of life, but they understood it. All the tithes, all the power, all the glory, all the high places, it was over. If this guy gets in office, it's over. We need to stop him. From that time on, they plotted to kill Jesus. And so what I see in John 12, just the very next chapter I just read, they said, listen, this ain't working. We're not stopping these people. But they knew they had to kill Jesus Christ. So Christ set everything in place till it was time to bring about his death. Now, this is important for us today. I'm going to get ready now to bring it to a close. The parallel of the church. The Worldwide Church of God was established during the rise of the world's upheavals in the 1930s and the 1940s. That's when the end-time work that we understand today, and I'm not saying it's the only work, some people do. I'm not limiting that. I'm limiting to what I understand that actually took place, all right? So it began to rise in the 30s and 40s, and it was kind of status quo. It grew a little bit, but it wasn't that huge, powerful work until the 60s and the 70s. By the 60s and the 70s, the people started coming into the church by the tens of thousands during those decades. Then what happened is that the church became scattered and silent. What was pretty interesting is that it wasn't time yet. Now, I don't know if I put the scripture in. Let me see if I got it here. Okay, well, I didn't put it in, but let me bring it to, because it's very important. Is that why was the basic? I say the church went silent. And I know somebody's going to get this tape and say, it never went silent. There have been churches going on and on and on and on. And you got some of these churches got 10, 15, 20,000 people in them. I understand that. I'm not saying that. The church has been scattered. But the effectiveness, talk to the church and say, how many people came into your church last year? How many people you got in the congregation off the street? You don't have the tens of thousands of people coming. So what I mean was, it wasn't yet time to bring that last push of the innumerable multitude for the warning at the end time. It wasn't time yet. It's just like with Jesus Christ. When he spoke up and they hated him, what did he do at one point? He hid himself. He said he walked no more openly. Remember that? Until it was time. He walked no more openly amongst the people. Same way with the church. God took the church. He brought them out. He got everything he needed to set in place. He showed us that when you stand up, the tens of thousands are going to get the warning witness. And it did. In fact, many of the World Tomorrow programs are in the archives in Washington. I don't know if you knew that or not. There's 5 years of them, of the World Tomorrow. And that's not an easy feat in Washington. And so now, just like with Christ, he went silent for a little while. He got everything set up. He got it all placed. Everything was in place. Same way with the church. God he raised them up. He created what he needed. He scattered them, or he sowed the seeds and everything until it was time. I asked in the first sermon, it's about all these things it says in Revelation 10. And let me show you right here. It says, you must prophesy again. And I ended that first sermon with this. Could we be at the beginning of that time? I think God has set everything in place for his church. He scattered his people so that's not one organization. There's many people scattered all over the place that God can bring the innumerable multitude to care for those people. And now we're seeing the climate and the environment and the times of the civil unrest where people are looking for answers. I think we're moving to the beginning of that time, where the church will become again an important role in people's lives. Time will tell. I did that in part 1. Look at Matthew 23. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees. The final analogy is this in Luke 12. It says, now when they bring you to the synagogues and the magistrates and the authorities, don't worry about what you're going to say or what you shall answer or what you should say, for the Holy Spirit will teach you in that very hour what you ought to say. When it came time for Jesus to stand up, was he politically correct? Matthew 23, verse 14. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You devour widows. 15. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You compass the sea and the land to make one proselyte. Verse 16. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees! He goes through over and over and over again. When it was time, God's word spoke with such boldness that they couldn't stand it anymore, and they crucified him. God's people will speak up one more time. A warning for this generation. Are we moving at that time? I think we're at the beginning of those days. Time will tell. When I speak next time, I'll talk about part 4 on lovers of self. God bless you. Till next time.